And in today's world of smartphones and caller ID, it's easy to forget that not long ago, anyone with a phone could ring you out of the blue. No filters, no warnings. Back then, you could pick up the phone, expecting a friend, and instead, find yourself speaking to a complete stranger who knew just the right words to keep you listening. That's exactly what happened in the case you're about to hear. A strange series of phone calls that not only baffled the people involved, but still have no clear explanation decades later. This story centers around bizarre phone conversations. But that's only one thread of a much larger and far stranger mystery. What happened to Gary Sudbrink and his family in the early 1990s might be government surveillance, might be alien contact, or might be something even harder to explain. And no one, no skeptic, no investigator, no conspiracy theorist has been able to offer a full explanation for what became known as the Sudbrink phone calls. Even now, with more facts available than ever before, the Sudbrink case doesn't sit neatly in any single category. Some think it's a case of government monitoring. Others suggest it's evidence of direct contact with non-human intelligence. And some propose something even more disturbing, evidence of a breach between alternate realities. Still, most researchers place the Sudbrink case in the realm of encounters with the so-called men in black, shadowy figures dressed in dark suits who have become a fixture in UFO lore since the 1950s. Though often assumed to be government agents, witnesses frequently describe their behavior as robotic, off-kilter, or even inhuman. Their speech can be stilted or oddly phrased, and they often ignore questions or social cues. That strangeness is one of the reasons some believe the men in black are not actually human or are being controlled by something that isn't. And, curiously, reports of their visits often occur alongside sightings of black, unmarked helicopters, aircraft that operate with eerie silence, fly low over homes, and seem to stalk those who have recently had UFO encounters. All of this context is crucial if we're to understand what happened to Gary Sudbrink, because the only way to judge the bizarre nature of the phone calls he received is to first understand the larger chain of events surrounding them. And thanks to an answering machine, we can still listen to those original calls today, more than 30 years after they were made. The chain of events begins quietly, years before the first phone call. In 1992, Gary Sudbrink, an officer in the U.S. Air Force, flew home to Long Island, New York, to attend his brother's wedding. He was stationed in San Antonio, Texas at the time, and hadn't seen his family in a while. While chatting at the wedding reception, Gary's brother Stephen playfully confronted him. Stephen described an odd moment earlier that day. While driving to the venue, he claimed he saw Gary pull up beside him on the highway, making silly faces through the window. Before speeding ahead, Gary was baffled. He explained he had just arrived by plane, and his car was still parked at his home in Texas. It was impossible that he had been on that road. The brothers brushed it off, chalking it up to a case of mistaken identity. But that odd encounter would come back to haunt them a year later. In February 1993, Gary realized he had a few free days in his military schedule. Rather than stay on base, he booked a last-minute flight back to New York to visit family. Here's the critical detail. Gary didn't tell anyone he was coming. Not his commanding officers, not his family, not even close friends. He simply packed a bag and headed to the airport. That fact makes what happened next deeply unsettling. While preparing for his flight, Gary was startled by a loud, rumbling sound outside his Texas apartment. As an Air Force officer, he immediately recognized it. A helicopter flying dangerously low. Stepping onto his balcony, he saw it, hovering just beyond his fence line, facing his apartment, about 20 feet off the ground. Military pilots know better than to fly that low over civilian areas. Gary rushed inside to grab his binoculars, but by the time he returned, the helicopter had vanished. Later that day, Gary arrived at the airport in uniform. He was waiting to board when a thin man in a long coat approached him. The man greeted him casually, then began asking about his travel plans. Gary responded politely, but found it strange when the man started taking notes in a small pad. The questions got more personal. The man asked for Gary's full name. Gary declined. Although he was wearing his uniform, his name tag wasn't visible. The stranger claimed he was doing market research for a new business, but Gary noticed he hadn't approached anyone else in the terminal. Just then, Gary's boarding group was called. Eager to escape the weird encounter, he excused himself and boarded. That wouldn't be the end of it. Once on the plane, a second stranger, a man with long hair and glasses, sat beside him and struck up another overly inquisitive conversation. This man too seemed deeply interested in Gary's travel plans. Soon, a flight attendant asked the man to move. He was in the wrong seat. But rather than move to his assigned place, he remained standing near the emergency exit, continuing to pepper Gary with odd questions, especially about how to spell his last name. Eventually, he was told to move to his actual seat, which turned out to be several rows back. Gary couldn't shake the feeling that something was off once he landed. In New York, Gary wasted no time. He called his landlord in Texas and asked her to keep an eye on his apartment, worried someone might be planning a break-in. Then he made his way to his parents' house. When he got there, another strange revelation awaited him. His father casually mentioned that a helicopter had hovered over their house earlier that afternoon. Gary's father then told him about a recent trip he had taken with his brother, Gary's uncle, to the Green Bank Observatory in West Virginia. There, they had allegedly seen something in the sky that they couldn't explain. Gary, skeptical by nature, dismissed the sighting, but his father was convinced. Later that evening, Gary decided to call an old friend named Mike. They hadn't spoken in a while, so he expected a normal chat. But when Mike picked up, the first thing he said was, "You're sounding better already." Gary was confused. Mike said they had just spoken 20 minutes earlier, and that Gary had sounded like he had a cold. But Gary hadn't called anyone, nor had he told anyone in New York that he was in town. The realization sent a chill down his spine. Someone had called Mike, pretending to be him. As Gary tried to make sense of this, he heard a beep, a second incoming call that he clicked over. What he heard would leave him shaken for the rest of his life. The voice on the other end was distorted, robotic, slow, and mechanical. "Is this Gary Sudbrink?" it asked. The caller repeated phrases, stumbled over Gary's name, and said something even stranger. "You are being impersonated by the other voice." Gary thought it might be his brother Stephen playing a prank. But the voice didn't sound anything like him, and the tone, the pacing, and the phrases were simply too bizarre. The voice asked strange questions. "How long are you going to be back from Texas?" When Gary replied, trying to make sense of the conversation, the voice became increasingly fragmented. Finally, the call ended. Gary sat in stunned silence. His friend had just been contacted by someone pretending to be him, and now this. Less than an hour later, the phone rang again. This time, the voice was slightly different, more halting, less robotic, but just as eerie. "Keep an eye on the sky," it said. "Orion, full moon." Gary's father overheard this call and grew immediately serious. The mention of Orion matched what he and his brother had seen in the sky weeks earlier in West Virginia. Before hanging up, the voice said something cryptic. "Show double of you." That phrase would come up again at 11:38 p.m. The phone rang. A third time, Gary's father picked up. He directly addressed the caller. "I know you're not human," he said. "You're intergalactic, aren't you?" The caller didn't reply directly but continued in its strange, looping way. Again, phrases like "keep an eye on the sky" and "show double from you" came up. Gary took the phone back. He tried to get answers, but the voice slipped further into static before the call ended once more. The next day passed without incident. Then, at 10:21 p.m., the phone rang one final time. This time, the voice said, "We come to be within this planet." It went on, "to visit the many, to be contacted as the same with you." The words made little sense, as if translated poorly or chosen without context. Gary's uncle got on the line, and the voice warned them about government interference. It ended with a chilling message. "The sun will rise from the dark side of the moon." Then it went silent. The family never heard from the mysterious caller again. What exactly happened during those 2 days in February 1993? Some say it was a prank. Devices like the Talk Boy, popular in the early 90s, could distort voices. When researchers sped up the recordings, they heard something resembling a human voice, but no one has ever come forward to claim responsibility. And the details, the helicopter, the men at the airport, the doppelganger, the impersonation, suggest something far more elaborate than a simple joke. Could Gary have orchestrated the whole thing to scare his UFO-obsessed father? Perhaps. But he never told anyone about the calls until years later, and never sought fame or profit from the story. Others believe this was an attempted alien contact. The cryptic phrases, references to Orion and the moon, and the warning about government interference all fit into known UFO encounter patterns.